I call Alistair Scott.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was a little surprised to listen to the last member's contribution and his rail against foreign capital, given that he's been around long enough and should know that this country is desperate for foreign capital. But that's another story. That's another story. Today, Mr Speaker, I'd like to talk about the bill before the House. Mr Speaker, this bill is not a silver bullet, and this bill does not bring in a register. This bill is part of a comprehensive housing package that enables and encourages home ownership, which is so important to the people of New Zealand. It increases the equity and the fairness around taxation. It is part of a suite that is reducing demand. So this bill focuses on the demand side of the housing market. And we also have a suite of policies that increase the supply side, because those are the two things that matter. Those are the two things that determine the price of a house: the demand, the aggregate demand, and the aggregate supply. Some of the things we have done to date, despite the opposition's assertions that we have done nothing: we have introduced 100 special housing areas across the country, including 84 in Auckland, 40,000 new homes and sections as part of those special housing areas. We've almost doubled the number of housing consents since 2011. We've increased the building work to over 14 billion. That's 21% up on last year, so things are heading in the right direction. There are 8 housing accords agreed with the local councils: Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington, Tauranga, Western Bay of Plenty, Queenstown Lakes, Tasman and Nelson. There's plenty of action, there's plenty of initiative, there's plenty of policy that is all contributing to the housing issue. Mr Speaker, 90,000 people are expected to benefit from the Kiwi Home Start scheme, and another part of the policy is the Kiwi Saver access to the 20,000 maximum grant. That's relatively new policy, and they're able to access and withdraw their total amount, including the tax credits, excluding the $1,000 Kiwi Start. So there's a lot going on, Mr Speaker, in this housing space. The RBNZ is also contributing by introducing LVRs, loan-to-value ratios, which will affect the demand side. That's part of the demand side, not government-led, RBNZ-led. So, Mr Speaker, from the other side, we have a lot of criticism, but no real alternative policy, except for, of course, the Kiwi Build program. The Kiwi Build program that's going to solve the country's home supply issues. 100,000 homes, apparently, will be built by the opposition, the Labor government. Where will they build them? How will they build them? Who will pay for those 100,000 houses that are proposed in the Kiwi Build program? They'll be designed by Grant Robertson to his liking, and the colour scheme, no doubt, chosen by Phil Twyford. Such is the central control that these people over here can, because they're sanctimonious, Mr Speaker, and that they don't understand the private sector is quite willing and able and capable to choose where they want to live, how they want to live, and the design of the house that they want to live in. Mr Speaker, in previous contributions, Mr Robertson has suggested even that the government superannuation fund get involved in the New Zealand housing market and build some of those houses. Of course, that would be, that would just be a disaster, having Mr Robertson involved in the governance of the government superannuation fund, already well weighted into the New Zealand market, and of course an outstanding performance. In fact, the highest performing government superannuation fund on the planet. But only to be, imagine if Grant Robertson got hold of it, just imagine. Mr Speaker, the Greens' option is to also create a fund to subsidise young people who would like to build their first home in Meadowbank, Ponsonby or Parnell. But who would be paying for that? Who would be subsidising those first home buyers in the Auckland market? Well, I tell you, Mr. Speaker, asking Wairarapa taxpayers to fund a housing scheme suggested by the Greens to allow first home buyers to build houses in Auckland would be offensive to them. Mr. Speaker, this bill strengthens existing taxation law. And just to clarify for Mr. Cosgrove's benefit what the existing law says. And the existing law says that if you purchase something, whether it's a house or in fact anything, as my colleague Mr. Bailey pointed out, if you buy shares or if you buy widgets for the purpose of resale, that profit or loss is assessable. So that's the current state of play, Mr. Speaker. The example Mr. Cosgrove gave of an Auckland family moving and buying a place in Queenstown with the intention of moving down there, but for some unforeseen circumstance was not able to go to Queenstown, demonstrates his total lack of understanding of what the current legislation is. It's the intention at the time of purchase, Mr. Cosgrove, and that is what is key. So, Mr. Speaker, this legislation strengthens what is already current legislation. It does this because the current legislation is difficult to measure. It is difficult to gauge what people are doing without the available information. It's an honesty system. The taxation system in New Zealand is based on trust, and of course people abuse that trust at times, sir. And this legislation is aimed to strengthen the ability for the IRD to capture what is trading income. So first of all, Mr. Speaker, the legislation is proposing that the IRD number is collected, is notified when the sale of the purchase of a house takes place. Second, the bill requires offshore people to have a bank, as well as an IRD number, and they're required to have a bank account. And this will strengthen the laws that already exist around money laundering. And that is a good thing. Mr. Speaker, there will be exemptions. The family home essentially is exempt. Unless, of course, that family home is sitting in a trust, and trusts, in which case it would not be exempt. The home exemption falls away, sir, if the family home is purchased and resold more than a couple of times. And that is because that family home is not really there for the purpose of living as a family home. It's obviously there for the purpose of trading and should therefore be captured by the bill. There are further developments in the pipeline, Mr. Speaker. The bright line test, which some of the opposition suggests is in this bill, it is not. There's a bright line test assuming a 2-year period is the appropriate time to measure the period of time of holding a home before it is taxable. And, Mr. Speaker, there are withholding tax proposals coming forward in the middle, later on in this year. Mr. Speaker, this bill strengthens the existing law. It clarifies the accessibility of income that is already determined in the Income Tax Act already. It tightens law around money laundering, and I look forward to supporting this bill and supporting further legislation around withholding tax and bright line 2-year determination. I support this bill and commend it to the House.